Hello and welcome to our podcast called Just Us. It's about racial reconciliation and justice from a Christian perspective. We have a text that we think about as our motto. It comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Make room for us in your heart. We hope that the result of our podcast will be that all of us make room for each other in our hearts.
Today is January 27th, 2021. On our episode today, we will be discussing the events that took place at our nation's capital on January 6th. We welcome you to listen and to think about that day and how it affected you personally.
And you could find us at Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple as well. And if you want to watch us, YouTube. So subscribe to get all of our notifications, and don't forget to give us a 5-star rating. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to our podcast, Just Us. And January 6th is the birthday of two of my sisters. So that's what I've always thought about January 6th. My two sisters. But this year, January 6th was a different day. And we all watched. We were confused. We couldn't believe what we were seeing happening in our nation's capital. And since then, there's been a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of dialogue, and since we are a podcast dealing with racial reconciliation and justice, we felt that we really had to talk about this. So we want to put it in context, we want to discuss it, and we want to process what happened. And we want to keep in mind the motto of our podcast, 2 Corinthians 7:2, make room for us in your hearts. That even though our feet are on earth, we want our minds in heaven. We want to look at people through the eyes of Jesus. And we want to be brave and courageous in speaking truth. So to my friends, what are some images from January 6th that have stuck with you?
Okay, I would say the images of savagery, that's like brute, the bruteness of what people were doing, Christian symbols is one of the things that was really daunting at the moment, at the time, and still to today.
You mean that the Christian symbols were associated with that kind of...
Right, with that kind of action, which include symbols of oppression, with Confederate flags, other flags that were waving there, alongside Christian symbols, Christian flags. And I'll just leave it there. I don't want to take all, but yeah, that's one of the things.
Thanks, Hans. Mimi?
Yeah, there were plenty images that were quite disturbing on that day. I specifically remember a gentleman with a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt or shirt on, which is just horrific. And also from what Hans mentioned, the symbols of Christian signs like the Jesus Saves, and it was just a wow moment, and not in a good way.
Yeah. I'll never forget the image of that policeman who was being crushed, and you could see the look on his face of just absolute terror. Yeah. And at the same time, there are people all around who seem to show no compassion whatsoever and are just shouting and continuing to press in on him. And just the lack of human compassion was overwhelming to me. And I also can't help but think of those same things that Hans and Mimi mentioned, the juxtaposition of Christian symbols, Jesus Saves, and Bible texts with the most outrageous evil, Camp Auschwitz, and a couple people who had T-shirts that said 6 million isn't enough.
Right.
I mean, how in the world do you put those things together? I can't think of anything that would be more of an oxymoron than the idea of Christian racism. It just is impossible, and yet supposedly that's what we saw. I mean, it wasn't Christian, but it was claiming to be Christian at the same time as that incredible racism.
Exactly.
Same thing, yeah. It's one of the things I said. Well, how can you could claim to be a Christian and you have these stance? It makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't matter what kind of party you are a part of. I don't care about that. However, if you claim to be a Christian, how can you stand with those oppressing and those actions that you have portrayed? Jesus saved, Jesus 2020, like that does not make logical sense. It's an oxymoron, water and oil, which does not mix. So
Yeah.
In Galatians, it talks about how in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek. So what the cross did was God so loved the world. And so you're right. The idea that there would be hatred and cruelty based on race connected with Christian symbols is appalling to me.
And the racism was, you just can't deny the racism as being a huge motivating factor in all of that. It was
Explain
so
what you-
blatant.
Explain what you mean. Because of those racist symbols?
Those
John?
racist symbols, the Confederate flag, I mean, having the Confederate flag there in the Senate chamber, and then praying,
Yes.
with the Confederate flag there.
Probably the most appalling thing for me was, and to be honest, I'll be honest with you, I thought that it was photoshopped because I could not believe that someone would come out so blatant. But putting a noose, hanging a noose, because that is a symbol that you cannot separate from the fear and the evil that it had. So I don't have words to say
Yeah.
how disturbing that is to me because of what that would mean. It's like I have friends who have had kids die in car accidents. And if somebody were to joke about something like that, there's no humanity for someone to do that. Mimi, it looked like you were going to say something.
Well, you said the noose, and the noose isn't just only a symbol of, it is a symbol of hatred, obvious, but it's also a symbol of power and
Right.
ideology,
Right.
philosophy,
Right.
and belief of a system that it seemed like those people wanted to keep in place. And especially who the noose at the Capitol was meant for. They were chanting that, hang Mike Pence, which is awful. And then, they put the noose up for him. And he is a Republican, quote unquote, one of them. And so that also struck me as a wow factor because apparently he didn't do what he was supposed to do according to their leader, the former president. And so automatically he was against their ideology, against their philosophy, their path to destruction, their hatred. And to see that kind of turn, it was just pure evil, everything that happened there.
no, I love what you just said there. The rooster, the chickens have come home to roost. That's basically the thought that came to my mind when you said what you said. America is founded, built on racism, built on hate, built on genocide, and it's interesting when the leaders at hand, the dogs, is basically what is the saying? When a dog never bite the hand that feeds you, and the dog is actually biting the hand that feeds you. Everything that you sowed, you will reap, and you saw that on January 6th. Your people went against you because they believe, as you say, the ideology, not idolatry, excuse me, the ideology of what was there. Like they went against the president, the president of the United States, and now you become the enemy. So this is what it was founded on, and here we are seeing it. And for another thing, I'm not shocked, but I'm shocked, if that makes sense. Christianity, colonizers, they came, and Christianity was used to oppress, right? So when you see so-called Christians there, that's not representing actually Christ, you see them acting this way, and it makes sense because back in the day, that's what it was. The Christian belief or the Bible was used as a tool to oppress certain people, and it's sad. It is really sad, and now we still see it in 2021.
So Hans, I want to ask you a question. You said America was founded on racist ideas, and for our listeners, to put that in context for our listeners, who grew up reading their history, that America was a place of liberties and a place that helped Europe rebuild after World War II, those kind of things.
Oh no!
What? Just briefly, but what do you mean when you say what you said about America was founded on racist principles?
I just like I said, like if you actually, so what America does is, paint a beautiful picture of, especially within textbooks, because I was in inner city school. America was great. They did X, Y, Z. But when I got older and actually saw the skeletons that was within America, and you actually read more and things that are not within history books, you would understand like the genocide of the indigenous people. When people are brought here on slave ships. So is racism, slavery, genocide. This was the foundation, and continue with saying Christianity. They use Christianity the wrong way to oppress certain groups of people and saying, I'm the master, you ought to obey. And this is what I'm saying, if you read more into the history of America.
So you kind of like an example of what you're saying is like Thomas Jefferson saying all men are created equal, but owning slaves. You're saying that he was saying all white men are created equal. Right. And also, by the way, in his day, women weren't created equal. So, yeah. So I just wanted to put context to what you're saying. So let's talk about, John, you wanted to say something first.
Well, I was just going to say that while all of that's true, we should also not forget that within that, there have been people all throughout who have tried to point us to a better way,
right? Who
have seen something beyond only white men being created equal, for instance. And we shouldn't forget that there are those heroes of justice that God has raised up throughout our American history as well.
Right. And one last thing, I was thinking as you gentlemen was speaking, how it's still an issue. Why is Christopher Columbus considered a hero? Why is there a day for Christopher Columbus? If you understand America's history, it's mind-boggling of why is there still Christopher Columbus? Right. So it's just like, in essence, we still want to just hide certain things under the rug when the rug is already full. You could already see everything that's under the rug, right? So let's transition to putting in context for our listeners. What led
we've talked about the images and what was disturbing about January 6th and the Capitol riots. What are factors that led to this? What are your thoughts? What led to this? What put us in a place like this? I mean, for example, we're in a pandemic. Americans have been quarantined. They've been isolated. Do you think that contributed to a sense of paranoia, to a sense of pent-up frustration?
Most definitely, I believe that all of those things, and as prior to the pandemic, I believe the last 4 years of the previous administration was some kind of quote-unquote payback for Obama, and it's been like a rebirth of the nation. Now, you heard of The Birth of a Nation, the original movie way back when, and I think his ushering into this the previous administration was the rebirth of that nation. And people have had, I truly believe this was a reckoning, a time of revelation of who we really are, the heart of this nation. And the whole world can't deny it anymore. Okay? So people, yes, this past summer, with all of the murders and the killings of innocent, unarmed black people, have also pulled back the screens of how people are treated in this nation. And some people don't think it's fair. Their leader, their God, their master, the previous president, showed them the path to the rebirth of their nation, which was also the rebirth, like I said before, of their ideology, philosophy, and what they believed was right and just and true. For him to continue on in this pattern of hatred. Now, some people watching, listening may not agree with me. That's perfectly fine. From what we have seen, and we have heard from that administration and all of his enablers in Congress and the Senate who have pushed along his ideologies and philosophies have shown us that this is deeply rooted and systemic. And we cannot deny it anymore. So because their rebirth failed at that insurrection on January 6th, they acted out their true nature. The true nature, they acted out. And what is also clearly disturbing is a lot of those people, you mentioned there, previously that there are a lot of veterans in there and military personnel, police officers, teachers, CEOs, workers at restaurants, probably stay-at-home dads and moms, and fire people who are service workers who are supposed to take an oath to serve and protect. And this is what we have. It has not changed very much. Yes, I love what you said about heroes and people who have pointed the way, the right way, along the lines of history. Love that. However, this rebirth of whatever was supposed to happen didn't happen the way they wanted to, and because it crushed their ideology, I guess, or they crushed their passion to push that through, they acted out this way. And
is it possible, because I like to read history a lot, and I can't find any nation in history that really did it right. As far as you look at any era in history, anywhere on the planet, and you saw people not behaving well, oppressing other people. Now, I'm not justifying America. What I'm saying is what made America's problem worse is that we claimed these very high values and these issues of human rights, but then we had this idea that was clear from the beginning, the idea that equality wasn't for everybody.
correct.
Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words,
Yeah, I believe so, because the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of freedom
right,
given to America by the French.
right,
However, give us your tired, your poor, huddled masses was meant for whom? Who was it meant for? Because the borders were closed to people fleeing, oppression and fear, and if we're supposed to be the land of the free, and the home of the brave, who is free and who is brave? Who was that truly meant for? And you can't tell a group of people who have been here or brought here against their will to go back.
Right.
You know, you can't do that.
Right.
Because this is supposed to be, this land is your land, this land is my land, but that's not necessarily true. Because there's no equality or equity truly from the foundation that was supposed to happen. It wasn't meant for other people to be free.
And so as we look in the mirror, you know, I was raised, and I still love America. But to me, real love means that I want it to be the best it can be. And that I want it, like Dr. King said, America has issued a check, and it's time to cash the check. And the check is the promise of equality and equality among all people. So when we look at America and see things about it that concern us, in a way, a democracy requires an involved and educated and passionate people. If it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people, then we need to wish for and pray for and do what we can so our country can be the best it can be.
And that's real patriotism, it seems to me,
Right.
is the care that we truly live up to our ideals. And a couple other factors that I think contribute to this. One is social media. I think we've become much more polarized because of social media, which
What do you
gives
mean,
people
John?
the opportunity to be nasty without having to look people in the face.
Right.
And it is exacerbated by the fact that the algorithms are actually geared toward controversy and letting you see more controversy because that's what keeps people on the screen. And the idea is to keep people on the screen as long as they can. And so, you know, there's this wonderful video on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, which shows how they use those algorithms
Yep.
to glorify polarization and keep you on the screen. And I think that has contributed to our society.
So you think
And-
that's pouring gasoline on the fire?
Yeah, I think so. And I think another thing we just have to confess to is that in our society there really is a glorification of violence. You watch any fairly innocuous TV program where there's conflict, and how does good come? It comes when the good guys shoot the bad guys. You know, we finally have it out and the bad guys get shot. We see violence as the way to solve problems. And it's ingrained in us, I think, from our whole media context in this country. And I think it's had an effect.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, to go back on your question of if it's like the quarantine, I don't believe it was COVID or the quarantine that spewed out what we saw on the 6th or what we are seeing through history. Well, yeah, last year. I believe the people that were at power, the leaders of America, their stands made other Americans bold enough to spew out hatred or division, and that in itself, I can't not say it as much as I do because it makes sense. The chickens really came home to roost, and that's the plain and simple fact. Like you will see certain people act the way they act truly if you have someone else backing you up. Like for example, let's say a little kid has a big brother and he's a bully and he goes, well, and he's bullying these other kids. and somebody steps up to him, right? And he was like, well, I'm gonna get my big brother on you to because he has this other person that could actually that shows more strength than he does. And I think that's what's happened. And because of what's happened there, we see it. We see it on television. We see it on the screen. And yes, people are being more brave because they're hiding at home or just writing emails or writing posts or whatever the case might be, tweets or whatever. So yeah, I agree on every aspect of that. But I don't think it's because of quarantine. It's just because somebody have a bigger brother.
Is it possible? I agree that the problem was there. I just wonder if the quarantine pent up people's frustrations. It wasn't the root cause. It's like shaking up a soda can, and then you open it up, and it's like, you know.
Yeah, I like that analogy because the soda can for the past 4 years was shaken up
Right.
quite heavily.
Right.
And you saw, it's like a them against us.
Right.
Those people, Muslim ban, get rid of DACA, close the borders to those people. Mm-hmm. They're scary. They come from S-hole countries. Keep them away. So that kind of polarization, it started a long time ago. How are they destroying our country? Look what they're doing. They're taking our jobs. They're doing this. They're doing that. I think that's where it started. It was never like this blatantly prior to the last 4 years. It was not. And then that started to build and build and build and build, until they didn't want certain people running for president and then they got what they wanted. They got a man who personified their beliefs and philosophies, and pushed this January 6th day to fruition. The soda can top came off, and all the evil hate spewed forth, sprayed everything.
So, in Matthew 7, it says, "By their fruits you will know them." Okay. So,
Oh boy.
could we extract from that verse the principle that the way we treat each other, the way we relate to each other, reveals the Spirit motivating us? So let's ask, and this is a difficult question. This is a hard question to wrestle with. Both sides. There's two sides. Was violence and looting when Black Lives Matter protests also bad? In the same way that we don't like the what happened January 6th in the Capitol. In other words, does it reflect? I told you this is going to be a hard question, but if we're going to really take this apart and be honest and be authentic, then we have to wrestle with what spirit do we have, and we have to be able to call out on both sides. That doesn't mean we take sides, but we call out on both sides what is problematic and what doesn't reflect. So anyway, fine if you disagree with me, but I'm just asking the question.
With Black Lives Matter movements, I would say the violence, you can't win with violence, right?
Right.
And even if you try to be peaceful, it seems like you can't win.
Can't win either. Exactly.
So,
I agree.
right?
Yep.
So it's like, how can we win? So but what you see in the Black Lives Matter movement and protests, actually protesting, you still see violent law enforcement,
Which isn't good.
which is not good, abusing and beating people
We saw
there, right? Now, when you see what happened on January 6th, it's a totally different look. It's a totally different story. The police officers were being beat, however, still holding people's hands to go down the stairs.
Ooh, make it plain. Yep.
You have to see what actually is the problem, and it's the system in itself. Systemic racism in itself is the issue, even though We could be standing here peacefully. We get beat up. Selma, Martin Luther King march. He gets the dogs chased after him. Fire hose. All of this stuff. But when we watched on January 6th, and when we saw it was welcome into the Capitol, things that are not supposed to be inside the Capitol, the Confederate flag, where people fought for their lives for that not to be in that building, you see it in the building. So it's not whether it's not like a black or white thing. It's a systemic thing. Like, certain people are catered to because of their looks or because of their group or which they believe in, and that's the problem. That's the true problem. It's not a protest or whatever January 6th was, a riot or invasion.
Insurrection.
Right. It's what the system would allow.
But then you heard on the news, like you said, with the media polarization. Look at these people in January 6th. Oh, they're patriots. They're just expressing their frustration that their leader lost. How is that picture painted? You see how it's painted. And it's been painted that way through all of history. If, like, the vision that comes to mind, that young lady was standing in front of all those policemen in riot gear. It was at one of the protests. And she was just standing there, dignified, brave, in front of those police officers in riot gear. What was she doing? She was unarmed. These people in the Capitol, guns, machine guns, bullets.
Bombs.
Yes, bombs. They found all around. What would have happened?
There's
Everybody
no doubt.
knows the question.
There's no doubt.
If that Capitol were stormed or tried to be stormed by people of color,
Right.
bloodbath,
Massacre.
death, a mass violence. And look at those thugs. But these people, patriots. You know?
Can you imagine when that group of armed people went into the Michigan State Capitol?
Right.
Yes.
If those had been people of color,
Yep.
how different
doubt.
it would have been.
Right.
There's no doubt. But I do want to bring back to that question, though.
Yes.
Because I freely agree with everything you're saying as far as that if a Black Lives Matter protest would have stormed the Capitol, it would have been a bloodbath. And because we saw the picture of the police that were mobilized when they thought that might happen. My question is, can we, to me it seems authentic to speak against behavior. That doesn't mean we're justifying either side, but to say when there is looting and when there is going into Nancy Pelosi's office and stealing her laptop, both sides are not the correct way. I'm not talking about peaceful protest.
Yeah, I think we have to recognize a huge difference in the way justice is carried out
I
and the
agree.
way people respond even
agree
to
with
peaceful
that.
protest. But I think at the same time, I want to condemn all violence.
That's
no
all I'm-
matter
that's all I'm
where
saying.
it comes from, I want to condemn the violence.
I-
But I am really unhappy with the way people justify by saying, well, they do it too. You know, it sounds exactly like little kids on the playground.
Yep.
You know, when the teacher catches one of them doing something, what do they say? Well, Tommy did something worse, you know.
Yep.
And we can't justify ourselves by pointing somewhere else.
Correct. I agree because I don't like looting and I don't like the violence either. I understand the rage.
I get it too.
There, you cannot overlook the underlying rage of why Black Lives Matter people and those who follow are angry. And I think people who don't agree with that are scared of that rage and that anger because it's been stewing for a long time. And once it's released, they're thugs. They don't want to understand why there's that rage there. People don't want to do it. Well, you shoot yourselves. You shoot black on black crime, Latino on Latino crime, but they don't want to understand the rage and why it exists in the first place. And if you're shouting Black Lives Matter, that's scary because all of a sudden you're some kind of, you want to be a Black Panther Party member or something. So I get what you're saying. I don't appreciate people looting small businesses and what people have, built their lives, spent their lives building, their businesses and violence and whatever. But look at what happened in, was it Charleston, Virginia? When those guys are out there with their tiki torches shouting, Jews will not replace us, blood and something. I don't remember what it was
And that was
exactly.
appalling.
And then the president at the time said they were very fine people. So what does that tell us?
Right.
Black Lives Matter
Right.
protesters who are protesting police brutality, inequitable, the justice system, are called thugs because they're shouting in the streets. They're pepper sprayed so the president can walk down to a church he's probably never walked through the doors and worshiped, holding a Bible, trying to do what? The police pepper sprayed all these people so they can get out of the way for him. What message does that send about the rights of people to protest peacefully and not peacefully? And who gets punished for doing it?
We wouldn't have this podcast if we didn't believe that those injustices are there and that our nation has a problem. I completely am with you on that. Completely. All I'm saying is to me it's authentic to identify. Look at it this way. There's a way of thinking that called above the line thinking and below the line thinking. And above the line thinking is based on, or below the line thinking is based on I blame, I deny, I excuse and I justify, I cross complain. Oh well, I do this. Well, you do that. In other words, it's not a willingness to look at ourselves and say, these are the principles that I believe in, and these are the principles that I'm living by. Above the line thinking is based on taking responsibility. It's on saying, what can I do to help the problem? And to me, what this way of looking at things is, it helps me to adjust to monitor my own emotions, because I don't want to become like what I hate, the injustice or whatever. Hans, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I see where you're getting there, and I know you, so I know your heart. So a lot of people won't understand, and I see what you're trying to get, but they're not the same, period. The Black Lives Matter protests and what happened is not the same, Bill.
I agree they're not.
Right. And
I stand with you on that.
Right, and the reason why I say that, and I know you're trying to put them together, but it can't be. When our people are being killed by law enforcement and being brutally beat, people of color, and we give so much to the country. It's like I lost a brother, I lost a mother, I lost a sister, right? Mimi's a mother. Like, if she sees a little kid, a 14-year-old kid, getting shot down by the police officer, she's like, that could be my son. This is my child too. So we cry out of pain. We lament because we don't have anything anymore. So we get upset because the system is against us. The system is on our necks. But when you look at something else and people get outrageous for a vote and all this craziness, ideas, and they do what they do and nothing happens to them, it's like, what?
Yeah. Yep.
So it can't, is not the same.
Yeah.
It is not the same at all. And we try to be peaceful. Peace doesn't work. Violence doesn't work. What works for our people? Like, I Am Not a Negro by James Baldwin.
Yeah.
It's beautifully said. He goes, I am not your Negro, right? I am not your N-word, right? You made the N-word, right? You made these people. I am not that. But yet you expect me to do something or be something. I can't, because you brought me to this place that I did not want to be in. We worked. We made this our own. You still burned it down when we was prospering. And then we just restart the whole process again. And the system is there to keep us down and oppressed. What else for us to do?
Yeah.
And violence, I'm not saying this is what we should go and attack. No, but you're lucky. A lot of us, people of color, do not hold the grudge that we hold to take back this country. Because if we, like, it, that's a different story, but
is.
it's
They
not the
tried.
same.
They tried to make a group, or form a group in the Black Panther Party for self-defense that knew the laws. They were very educated men. They had their PhDs, you know, the leaders. You know, they formed a group of people to be an answer to that problem and set chapters across the United States to answer that problem, right? But all of a sudden, black people joining together to fight injustice, you know, they read the laws, they exercised their Second Amendment rights to carry arms, you know, and they did. They formed groups to watch police and how they, you know, policed black neighborhoods. Nobody really wants to know what they did. And I agreed with their philosophy that they were going to stand up for their rights because nobody else was. And what did they do? When they went to the Capitol building with their guns, that was in California, there's pictures of it everywhere. Go Google it. Black Panther Party at the Capitol House in California. What happened to them? All of a sudden, gun laws were made everywhere. Oh, you know. And if that were to happen again, if black people were to take up arms now and try to go do the same thing, not the same. So that rage, it's damned if we do, damned if we don't. You know? And so that rage is there. It is there. And it's deeply rooted, and we only can carry on. We lament, we uplift our voices. That's where the songs came from. You know, the Negro spirituals, those soul-wrenching songs of pain, but hope. You know, and sometimes every day you got to thank God for another day, right? But the rage is still there. You have relief that this previous administration is gone, but it doesn't get rid of the rage because of what we saw. Because we know that we can't be quiet, or we you know, our silence and then our action are both damned. And we've lived with that for centuries and centuries and centuries. And how do we overcome that? You know, people say, well, we're in a post-racial society because Obama became president and served 2 terms. False.
Right.
Because in his own Senate and the House and the Senate, the majority did everything they could to block anything good that he wanted to do.
And in asking the question, I know I didn't frame it right, because you can't equivalate people that are suffering and in pain with people that are expressing hatred. I'm not trying to make a moral equivalence there. All I'm saying is this, is in 2 Corinthians 10, it says, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world.
Correct.
And
I
it
agree.
says we take every thought captive to Christ. And so all I was merely was trying to say, I stand with you in the injustice, and that it has to change. That's why we're doing this podcast. All I'm saying is that I am against violence used anywhere, because I don't think it solved the problem. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they aren't the same. The causes are not the same.
No,
But you see how violence doesn't solve anything. However, you see how Christian, since this is a whole Christian podcast, Christianity, and how Christians did the whole genocide or the crusade.
Right.
You see, in the name of X, Y, and Z. It's been in that in the bloodline, in the history for centuries. Like, this is, people use certain things to oppress other people.
Right.
And it's wrong. Period.
Right.
And this nation is a Christian nation, right? It's founded on Christianity. We are founded on Christianity. But we have been, that's what I'm saying, like, we have been doing Christianity wrong. The nation has been doing Christianity wrong. History has been doing Christianity wrong. Gandhi says, I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians, because your Christians don't act like your Christ. That's a slap to Jesus' face when your Christians act something totally opposite of Christ, and you hold the name of him. But for centuries, that has been going, and violence has helped Christianity be where it is now.
And that's why
And
we
that's
have to,
sad.
That's why we have to tell the truth,
Yep.
and we have to say we've got to be different. We've got to
be like Christ.
We've got to be like Christ. Mimi, you liked the poem that Amanda Gorman did at the inauguration, didn't you?
Yeah, it was phenomenal.
I've heard
She
you
was
mention
a
about
phenomenal
it.
young lady.
Is there anything in that poem that you think speaks to where we go from here?
Everything about that poem, what she said gave hope for the future. In particular, and I had to dwell on it because I wanted to make sure I understood the context of what the young lady Amanda Gorman was saying and how she wanted to relate it to the audience and how I related it with my spirit. Did I actually believe this? Can I connect with it? Can I understand it? And I truly believe it's a message for everyone. The poem was just phenomenal, but there's a part in here where she said, after she described, being benevolent but bold, fierce and free, she said, "But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright."
That's powerful.
And I read that, I highlighted it, I circled it, I started, and I'm like, that message she shared was profound. And at the end of her poem, she talked about, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Now, that has been circulating quite a bit around, the media and her interviews, that last part of her statement. But I believe this thing, if we merge mercy with might. Now, it's not saying one or the other. It's both. Okay? And I think that's a call to be bold. And with might, with right. And I take that to mean justice. And, then love becomes our legacy. And change our children's birthright. But we all have to embrace that collectively.
Right.
Right now, we're too separated.
Right.
And in order for this message that she so eloquently shared at
Beautifully.
the inauguration, we have to be unified. I don't know how that can happen, but in our corners where we are individually and in our groups where we are collectively, we need to be that light and start merging mercy with that might, or else we're going to be forever in that darkness.
That makes me feel hope, just hearing you say that, Mimi. Yeah, because we don't want to stay in the darkness.
No.
John, is there any scripture that comes to your mind when you think of, because obviously we're mourning what happened on January 6th. We don't like looking in the mirror, what that says, what that tells us. Is there any scripture that speaks to you?
When I look at what happened, and it is just so terrible, and the kinds of problems we've been talking about today, I think about something that we find in Scripture that I think we've lost largely in our society. One thing that they often did in Scripture is simply to come before God and lament, to let God know how they feel about these things. In fact, more Psalms are laments than anything else. When you read the Psalms, and some people tell me they don't like reading the Psalms because, they like reading the ones that are praise God, shout with joy, etc. But then there are so many of them that are laments. And it's true that most of these laments will make some kind of a reversal or turn and say, but I put my trust in God. But some don't. Like, I think of Psalm 88, where the psalmist comes and just outlines before God how terrible things are. And all of his friends have turned against him. He feels that God is against him. He just feels hopeless. And it never does have that reversal. The last word of the psalm is, my companion is darkness.
Yeah.
And the book of Lamentations, a whole book, 5 chapters. In the middle of chapter 3, there's a little bit of hopefulness. Great is your faithfulness. But most of the whole book is just lament before God. And I think there are sometimes maybe we just need to come before God and lament.
Yep.
And, in our society, everything's supposed to be happy and joyful. And but sometimes, really, the appropriate response to what's going on is lament. I think of this Psalm 88. We had a service at the church I was pastoring in California each Christmas time that we called Blue Christmas. And we invited people who had suffered real loss over the course of the year. And it made Christmas difficult for them to just come and have an opportunity to lament and to come before God with those pains. And 2 of my colleagues were doing the sermon together for that Blue Christmas service. And that day was the day of the murder at Sandy Hook, where all those children died.
Wow.
And what do you say in response to that? And so they preached on this psalm, Psalm 88, and it was powerful to just come before God and say, we hardly know what to say. We lament, but there is a hopefulness even in the lament,
Yeah.
because it means you trust God enough to come to him and be honest with him and lay out what you're feeling.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Thank you, John. When I think of the Confederate flag going through our Capitol building, or a noose being displayed outside, I lament because of what those symbols mean and the pain that means to my brothers and sisters. We lament that there is ugliness in our nation, and there is hate, and there is fear that causes people to act like that. And we want our nation to be better. And that's why we're doing this podcast, and we are united. We stand together, and we kneel together in asking God, would you heal our land? And we confess our sin. We pray for God to heal our land, and we lament.